Hello down there. Sorry, I'm just doing a skydive. Welcome to Monstrosities, Mon Amour, the podcast where we serenade unheralded places. I'm John Grindrod, author of Tales of the Suburbs, LGBTQ+ lives behind net curtains, which The Guardian said was worthy of Victoria Wood. I know. I was just struggling out of my parachute when I found myself bundled into the back of an Austin Maxi and driven to what sounds like Hertfordshire by historian and podcaster Gareth Edwards. Fun times. Gareth, where the hell are we?
We are in the multi-storey car park in Stevenage town centre.
I feel like a lot of my journeys start with a multi-storey car park, but Stevenage town centre is totally different from anywhere that we've been so far. This is great, but why are we here?
We're in Stevenage because it's one of my favourite places on earth, and I don't just say that as someone who was born here. You know, I call myself a Londoner now, but I will always at heart be a Stevenage boy. It's just a glorious piece of the future that never was.
Britain's first post-war new town, it being the real pioneer of all these ideas. As you say, it's really, really innovative as a place. Is that why you like it?
I think it is, and that's on both a personal level and as a historian. 30 miles north of London, you've got this place that was a bit of post-war hope. It's that Keynesianism, the beverage plan. It's the idea that you build a place that has all the amenities that any community can ever need, and that the future can be better. And even though it's faded now and it's slightly frayed around the architectural edges, you can still feel that when you wander around Stevenage. I always find that whenever I go back to visit family, it's a place that feels like it feels hopeful. And I think hope is so important to who we are.
Absolutely. And of course, the reason that we're in the car park underneath is because the town centre is pedestrianised and always has been. So that was how it was conceived, wasn't it?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Stevenage was the first new town, and the new town plan was this idea that kind of kicked in 1944. Came out of the Abercrombie plan, which is really London has been extensively redecorated by the Luftwaffe, and what do we do in the reconstruction? And part of that was, well, do we try and expand these towns on the edges, and do we build them into better places? Take the opportunity to build vast new towns on these open lands in Hertfordshire and beyond, and plan them properly. Let's make sure that every little area of the community has a little shopping centre. It's got like shops with it, and then you have a core shopping centre in the centre that's got the bigger shops, your CNAs and all of those kind of things. And Stevenage was built on that model, and all of that is connected and still is connected largely by a network which was genuinely revolutionary, of roads and cycle paths in equal measure.
So cycle paths, still feels incredibly futuristic that you would design a town in Britain around that. There's a sort of European feeling about that, but not a very British feeling about that.
Which is something I kind of really dislike, because we invented it. Like, I remember being at a transport conference many years ago now. I was chatting to the guy who was the head of the Amsterdam Transport Authority. And when we were talking and I mentioned that I was born in Stevenage, he got genuinely excited. Like, he was getting his phone out and he was showing me that on the walls of his office, he has photos of underpasses in Stevenage. He talked about when he was an undergraduate, when he was studying transport and studying transport infrastructure. They went from his university in the Netherlands, they jumped on a ferry at Rotterdam to Harwich, and then they drove down to Stevenage in a minibus. It was part of their course, was going around Stevenage in the 60s. And I looked into that, and Stevenage Town Council, as it was publishing leaflets in Dutch, because they had so many Dutch people, like transport people, coming over to see what it was like, that they published these leaflets explaining the logic behind it. So, wow. Yeah, when you see like a European town that's built with like roundabouts and cycle paths and equal balance, and it's winning European transport awards today, that probably started in someone's mind because they came and visited Stevenage.
That's incredible, isn't it? And actually, there are loads of comparisons you can make between Stevenage and Rotterdam, for example, aren't there? Like, there's lots and lots of things that both places do really well, and both places still feel really kind of futuristic because of it. Why was it so innovative? I mean, it didn't have to be that innovative, did they, when they did this town?
Even in comparison to other new towns in the Garden Cities and Milton Keynes, Stevenage was hugely innovative in its cycling and roadway balance, because a lot of the work there was done by a chap called Eric Claxton. So Claxton is quite literally the man who invented the cycle path. And he was a Londoner. Woo! He was working in London in the 1940s and became involved in the Abercrombie plan work. And then beyond that, ended up on the project team that was building Stevenage. And over time from then, he stayed in Stevenage and he carried on doing things. When Stevenage started being built with a development corporation and everything else, he was one of the first engineers. He went on to be the chief engineer of the Housing Development Corporation in Stevenage. And he held that role for decades. So what you really see when you're in Stevenage is you see Eric Claxton's dream of what a future could look like, because he had that level of control. Stevenage had a town architect. They didn't really get to do much because Claxton was determined to run everything, and no one was going to stop him. I love playing computer games. I love playing games where you build a city, your Sim Cities or your stuff like that. Claxton did that with Stevenage. That was his thing, and he was hugely influenced by both world wars. He's left some oral history accounts. The Stevenage Museum have a whole bunch of oral histories from him, and one of the things he talks about in that is that he was hugely conscious that the wars had left the country owing those who returned a better life. And he said he was determined to build a town where no one would ever die on the roads.
Wow.
Which is a very modern, that's what do we call it now? Like position zero or something like that. Yeah. He was doing that in the 1950s. And that's why you get this balance of, he believed you achieve that by giving the roadway and the cycleway, the cyclist and the road user, equal measure. If it's harder to use the cycle path, people will cycle on the road. Yeah. So if you go to Stevenage and see it today, you can still see that you get those roads and cycle paths always follow the same route. There might be a minor divergence. If you need to have a road junction where a cycle path and a road interact, for every metre you take away from the cyclist to create an underpass or go under, you can add 2 metres to the road, because road users can give up 2 metres and cyclists can give up 1 metre, and both of them won't notice the difference. And I just think that kind of thing is beautiful. And Stevenage, even today, stands as a testament to that. It's such a beautiful dream, and it still works today.
But Stevenage is really ahead of the curve on that, isn't it? It's not following a trend. It's like inventing a trend. And also, given that he carried on in that job for ages, it allowed continuity. And you only really get this kind of level of consistent kind of progress in a place if you've got consistency. And having somebody who's going to push through that over decades really helped, didn't it?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, he's effectively chief engineer from like 1963 through to 1972, and then he hands it off to one of his apprentices who carries on the dream. But he's the engineer there right from the beginning, from 1946. So you have almost 30 years of continuity in terms of how that town develops, and that's because of Eric Claxton. Growing up in Stevenage, you cycled everywhere as a kid. Like, if I wanted to go and see my mates or whatever else, I could cycle there. From the age of 8, I was cycling to school. I cycled to primary school on my own because it wasn't that far away, and my parents knew I could do the entire journey with at no point touching a road. Like, when I started secondary school at 10, I did a presentation on this for a transport conference years ago, and I pulled up on screen, like, overlaid on Google Maps, the route you had to take to my secondary school, which was on the complete other side of town, if you went by car, and the route you would take if you wanted to cycle the entire way without, and I think the grand total of road you would touch was a minor road, and you'd touch it for about 100 meters.
Wow.
And those paths almost overlapped. Like, that's how close those relationships were. Yeah. There's some fascinating stuff. If any listeners know Stevenage, they know that one of its things that is there's what's called the 6 Hills, which are 6 old archaeological mounds. They're old burial grounds. If you want an example of Claxton's sometimes over dedication to his dream, when they were building 6 Hills Way, the big way that passes through that, he was so determined to keep the route correct and keep cycle tracks next to it, that he concocted a plan to move each of those scheduled monuments by digging like 20 meters down, sliding big metal plates under them, and then shifting them about like 500 meters to the left, just so that his road and cycle paths could go how they go. English Heritage got wind of it and stopped him before he could pull it off. But like, it just gives you an insight into his absolute dedication at like, no, this is how a town should be. This is how it should work. And you don't have to have this very dry American grid system. You can do it with surrounding countryside. You can do it with like nice long verges of greenery. You can build organic feeling towns around it. Everything can flow. And it still does in Stevenage. You still feel that. And it's coming back as the town expands again. Because as you say, now in the future, we now know that Claxton was right. You need that balance between cycling and driving.
So did you grow up in a development corporation house?
Yes, so I grew up in what was Development Corporation House and was a council house. And so I lived in that world. And then Thatcher did her thing and my dad bought the house out of that and all of that. When I went to university at Gent, and I went to university in London, I was so used to the idea that as a kid you had a bike and you cycled everywhere and all this. And it was almost like a culture shock thing of like coming to a city and realizing that actually everyone didn't grow up in a world where you could cycle around and just go to your mates and do all of that. And obviously you have buses in London and everything else, but it's vehicles. And I was just used to the idea that you just do that on a bike.
And also one of the things that's really striking about Stevenage is it's founded before the Festival of Britain, which is sort of slightly mind-blowing in itself. But it really adopts that festival style, kind of really wholesale. The centre really expands that idea of their festival style. The colours, the kind of rhythms of the buildings, the combination of modernism and also a decorative element that a lot of modernism sort of turned its back on. Stevenage really, really enjoyed that, didn't it? You go round Stevenage, you've got a lot of colour, a lot of decoration. Did you appreciate that stuff as you were growing up?
Not really. I don't think I did as a kid. Partly it's the metal rusts. It needs repainting. There's only so many times you can repaint a Crittall window before you can't open it anymore. So it felt faded by the time I was growing up in the 1980s and 90s. And I think on a deeply personal level, I appreciated it. But it was only later. It's only really now almost. Once I hit my sort of 20s, 30s, I kind of went, there is a beauty to this. There is a real beauty to this. I always think of it as it's the future of Ladybird books. It's that thing of going, this is what a high-rise flat will look like in future. To me now, going back, it's beautiful. And I lament slightly when you see that they've refaced a lot of these buildings, right? Which I get they have to do. But at least with the housing styles, and to a certain extent with the town centre, they managed to preserve it. And with the clock tower you get in the town centre, which is still very much in that style.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Just from where I'm across from where I'm holding you captive is the place I got married. I got married in St George's Church.
Oh, did you?
Stevenage, yeah.
Enormous St George's Church.
Which is built in that festival style. It's that triumph of glass and concrete and metal. When we got married, it was on the hottest day in May that year. And I think I lost a good kilo in weight just being in a wedding suit in that church. But it's beautiful. Stevenage was multicultural and multi-religious because it was that London overflow. And so when they thought about the areas, they thought about what areas needed. So you're just as likely to find a Catholic church in Stevenage as you are a Protestant church, because when they were moving out the large Irish Catholic communities, which is half of my family, they were thinking, well, actually, these people are going to want a church. They don't want a Church of England church. They want the Church of the Transfiguration or something like that. Stevenage is a town built on love and hope, and I think we all need that.
And I love the fact that when they were forming these towns, in the very early days before all the amenities had sort of come in and they'd been able to kind of finish stuff, when these neighbourhoods were being created, there was a real emphasis on creating clubs and organisations and sort of getting people involved in the community more widely through play and through arts and through sport and culture. And those things were very much the glue that's held all the kind of early new towns together at the beginning. That spirit, the sort of spirit of the development corporation, it lingers for a while, but it's very hard to kind of maintain that over time, isn't it? Development corporations, they've got a 25-year lifespan. So once they've kind of built the basis of the town, it's sort of ceremonially handed over to the local authority to kind of look after. And normally what happens is the local authority goes, you're a spoilt brat, we're going to take all of your toys off you. Now you've had all of this attention for 25 years, we're now going to we're going to completely defund you and rob you of all of your riches. And that does happen in a lot of the early new towns. And I think Stevenage really suffered from that. So you have this beautiful legacy of what was achieved by the Development Corporation, and then things fall apart.
Yeah, Stevenage really suffers in the late 80s and early 90s. And ironically, the times I'm enjoying the benefits of it. Because of that, you get that starvation of funding. My dad was the doorman at the Bowes-Lyon Youth Club, which is one of the big youth clubs in the town centre, named after the Queen Mother because she had a big interest in it. She used to pop in. He remembers her popping in because they had a bar upstairs. They had the youth club and skate park downstairs, a skate park in like 1980s, And
wow.
You go to these youth clubs, but upstairs they had a bar, and the bar was for young people. The Queen Mum used to love going there because they'd show the racing during the day. So she'd do a kind of I'm touring the area to visit things that are associated with my family, and it would always just happen to coincide with an important horse racing thing. And then she'd go and perch in the youth bar upstairs and watch the racing on the TV up there while drinking gin. But she'd be chatting to Stevenage teenagers while she's doing it. Like it's just a pocket of almost lost Britishness. And yeah, you get the birth of the community centres. I was a scout. There were so many scout groups in Stevenage because there were the community centres in which they could meet and they could be there. Ironically, the thing they didn't build enough of to begin with was pubs. Like they had to do a bit of a retroactive element of building pubs into communities because I think there was a bit of a slightly pious belief when it was put together. Well, actually, let's build less pubs. What it actually just meant was a lot of illegal pubs popped up. So they were like, well, actually, we just need to start building these into large communities. It's a world that's come back into fashion. Whenever we talk now about 15-minute cities and stuff like that, I think, well, that was what Stevenage was. That's what it was meant to be. That's what it was designed to be. And there's a tragedy to it as well because it didn't work. But it didn't work because the idea wasn't good. It was because the idea was too early. So what you get in Stevenage is Claxton's dream of this equality between car and bike. He imagines people cycling to work at the Kodak factory in Stevenage or places like that. But it doesn't really happen for the adults because ultimately cars have become an aspirational thing in the 1960s and the 1970s. You want to own a car. Owning a car is a thing that is cheap enough for you to do, and petrol's cheap enough for you to do, that in a weird way, Claxton making it so there was absolute parity between bikes and cars meant that there was no one ever was going to take the bike because it was just as easy to take the car. Yeah, and it's not really until you start getting those early generations of kids like me who grew up in Stevenage entirely. It's the kids that benefit from the cycle access and the kids that benefit from that before the adults do. And now, as we move into an era of things like Stevenage as a commuter town for London commuters, I've got friends who live in Stevenage that had no idea I was from there, who will wax lyrical about the fact that they can have a house relatively near the outskirts. They can cycle to the station. They can then go to their job in London and then cycle home at the end of the day. Yeah, that's what Claxton wanted. But he was very disappointed. He was very disappointed at the end of it all. He retired to Australia and he was quite a bitter man at the end because he'd seen what he'd built was a beautiful thing. And the continental people were already starting to take it and recognise it at that. We never really did in this country.
Technology and idealism are slightly at odds with one another. We've got an idea of what we can do, and technology can offer a kind of version of that, but it can't offer the version that we could do now. Technology now would allow a lot of those ideas to be done very, very simply. But then it was a huge ask to be able to do a lot of this stuff. None of the early new towns really plans for the number of cars that end up on the road. But how could they? Because we couldn't predict that future.
And Stevenage really suffers from that in the late 80s and early 90s and moving through that period. And I mean, Claxton dies in 1993. And I always think that's a bit of a tragedy. You know, had a good innings. He was born in, I think, 1909. But like, if he'd lived another 10 years, he'd have seen what he thought was right start to become the way of the world. I think really from 2000 onwards, we start to get, 1998 is the foundation of TfL in London, Transport for London, and you start to see that transition of going, actually, let's think about balance, let's think about alternatives. But yeah, I mean, a perfect example of what you're talking about is the cul-de-sac I grew up in when I was really young, was a cul-de-sac that had a parking for 4 cars and then a large green that was there, and we would be out there playing cricket on it. You know, you could legitimately play cricket on this green. And yeah, okay, sometimes your ball's going to go into someone's front garden. If you hit a garden wall, you've scored a 4. You know, if it goes over, it's a 6. By the time I left Stevenage, and indeed if I go back and visit now, because my dad's still in the same house, that green's gone. The kids are still there. Like, there's still families living on that street. I see kids there now, but what they've got is a narrow strip of green, maybe like 5 meters wide at most. They can't play in that in the same way as we could growing up. I could play with the kids. I got to know the kids at the houses opposite. That element of community shared spaces has gone. Yes, they can wander, like 15 minutes walk away is the gorgeous Fairlands Valley Park, which is amazing and is still there. But those spaces were more intimate and they were more immediate when in Claxton's dream. And they were that way in Stevenage for a long, long time. And when they're building places now, they're trying to recognize that and build that back in. But there's an element of destructiveness that happens to Stevenage in the 80s and 90s. I don't think it'll ever quite fully recover from or emerge unscarred from.
There's a carelessness, isn't there? This is a very precious dream that needs to be looked after. This is not something that everybody in the country is going to experience. This is very peculiar and specific to this kind of wave of early new towns. We need to kind of look at those things very carefully and protect the things that are good from them. But that is absolutely not what happens. There's a kind of carelessness about this stuff. These are not generic places. Stevenage is as ungeneric as you could hope for, isn't it? It's so quirky and so interesting because of it. And that's the real joy of going around it, is you see the different neighbourhoods have got somebody's different vision about how you might live, but that whole overall kind of plan of it is a lovely unified idea of how we might all live together and work together and how we might flourish. And that's a really lovely, optimistic notion. And when we still see glimpses of that in modern Stevenage, that's a really great thing.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, as I'm going back now and you see the regeneration that's going on in the town centre, just opposite where we are now, seeing that dream almost come back and a recognition that there's something to be proud of, that before everyone else was thinking this way, this town was. Maybe it's taken 40 years, 50 years for that dream of Stevenage and Claxton and the post-war consensus dream to be recognised as important again. But that actually Stevenage does get to say, well, we did it first. And we may have made some missteps along the way, but we've still got the core infrastructure there that allows us to be the best at it again. And I think that's almost become a sort of, in branding terms, a USP for the town as we enter a new decade, is, yeah, if you want to commute into London, if you want to do a lot of working from home, if you want to do those things, well, Stevenage is a great place to do it. And it was. It was just, as you say, that we didn't know those things were going to be important. Claxton did. And I like to think that wherever he is in engineer heaven, he is looking down right now and going, yeah, okay, people finally get it. They finally get what I was trying to do.
Which is a lovely idea. Now, we're sat here by the clock tower. I'm getting a bit peckish. And I can't help remembering that in the back of the Maxi, while we were zipping around, there was various tins kind of clanking against my head. What's all that in the boot?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, the nice thing about the way Stevenage was built is there's always a bakery around the corner. Less so than there used to be, but there always is. And those bakeries are great for fresh bread. And what better thing to do while sitting around a glorious fountain, which my elder sister actually redesigned, by the way. She's the person who came up with this overflowing fountain thing that we're sat around now. She used to get incredibly annoyed when me and my friends used to put bubble bath in it and make it overflow with bubble bath. But is that, I love a good sandwich. I think there's something very British and core about a sandwich, but I'm I'm a man of simple sandwich tastes,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there is nothing better in the world than a good corned beef sandwich with white bread and just oodles of butter and just a nice slab of corned beef through the middle of it. So that's what we're going to be eating for lunch.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there we are. Why corned beef?
Part of it is so I'm a very simple man in sandwich. I love fancy food. I love a good meal, but I'm not the kind of person who wants to make it myself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
good food is an art, and therefore I want people to make good food for me. Like, I want to eat it when the experts make it. But I think, and maybe it's just, because I'm a 40-something man, but I have a bit of a violent reaction against going into a Tesco's these days and seeing something like, sun-dried tomatoes with corn-raised chicken and Toulouse mushrooms on rye bread as a sandwich in a meal deal. And I'm like, that's like, I'm paying for every single one of those adjectives. And like, I think there is a beauty in simplicity and almost that sort of functionality of art. I mean, it's probably the Stevenage boy in me, but corned beef sandwich to me is the right balance of mixings of flavor, the salted beef meat mixing with the butter, fresh warm bread. It's whole, it's nourishing, it's very tasty, and like it's quick and easy to make, and it's just perfect to me. It's the perfect sandwich. And so yeah, a corned beef sandwich or a fresh corned beef crusty roll is to me the peak of lunchtime. Have it with a nice bag of crisps, maybe a yogurt, that kind of thing. Like, there's a beauty in simplicity and functionality, and corned beef to me, I mean, it's invented in 1753. It's been around since then.
Yeah, and I was thinking it's probably no coincidence that you are an amazing historian and military historian, that there's a connection here between your work and the history you research and your favourite sandwich. I think there's probably a little connection going on there, is there?
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, obviously, like corned beef, and again, for UK listeners will know exactly what we mean when we say corned beef. It's that, as you say, it's salted beef boiled together that comes in a can. But the Americans don't. It's a very different thing there. But yeah, I mean, like it's bully beef. It's if you've ever read kind of war comics or anything like that, whenever they talk about bully beef, well, that's corned beef. It's corned beef in a
I
can.
never knew that.
So yeah, it's been around. It's been the key British Army thing since the Boer War era. And in the early 2000s, when they did the massive overhaul of the army rations and how you have them into these multi-vitamin packs and everything, that was when they decided to start getting rid of corned beef as part of the standard British Army rations. Huge backlash from soldiers. Huge backlash from everyone going, no, actually, we really like that. It's pretty tasty. You can eat it anyway. You can eat it cold if you really want to. It's lovely warmed up and mixed with some spuds to create corned beef hash. Like, it's a proper multi-purpose food that travels well. I do think it's a bit old-fashioned of me. I know it's a bit old-fashioned of me, but like, if I can't have that, I want a solid cheese and pickle sandwich with no adjectives. Like, that's the thing. You can't put adjectives on a corned beef sandwich. You can't have a corned beef sandwich on rye bread. Like, no one's going to do that. It's just not going to work.
No. The only really important thing you need to add to corned beef is the key.
Yes.
Because if you lose the key, I mean, that was always one of the most bizarre things about corned beef. I always remember was having to like unwind the key around and kind of slowly peel the tin open, which is such a peculiar action. That in itself always made it feel like a bit of an event, because no other food that I was aware of had a key that you needed to open it with.
Yeah, and again, I think that is, you're right. There's a certain theatre of childhood to it. It's corned beef sandwiches for lunch, and then it's Finder's crispy pancakes for dinner. That's the world I grew up in. There is a nostalgia element, even today. Yeah, it's a ring pull now, the same way as your cat food is. So it does feel a lot like opening a tin of cat food. In fact, my cats get very posh cat food, and frankly, I suspect their cat food is considerably better and more nutritious than my corned beef tin is. But I'm very lucky. I live in Walthamstow these days. I'm an East Londoner, and there's a little cafe around the corner that makes corned beef sandwiches and fresh corned beef rolls, and they deliver. So, like, if I'm ever feeling a bit stressed or low at lunchtime, like, just straight on Just Eats and order myself a corned beef sandwich, can of Coke, bag of beef crisps, and that's levels me out again and sets me up for the afternoon.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for sharing your brilliant choices. Gareth, where can people find out more about your work?
Yeah, I mean, so as you mentioned, I'm a historian myself, various areas. I love falling down historical rabbit holes. It's how we know each other originally, I think. Many shared chats over Ladybird books back in the day, as much as anything else, and New Towns. They can find me on Blue Sky. So I'm Garius on Blue Sky, garius.bsky.app. I video game streamer as well. So if you're on Twitch or YouTube, look for Garius the Brit, that's me. But obviously, most importantly, for people who are listening to podcasts, is I do have a podcast. It's the Untitled History podcast, which was our working title for it. And then we realized actually it just works. But yeah, on that, I stray across everything. We've talked about the complete history of ship's cats. I've got an episode coming up on the vast Nazi whaling industry. Unilever as a company are almost single-handedly responsible for the near extinction of the blue whale. They don't tend to talk about that on their sustainability page, but we've got a podcast episode on that coming up.
Wow.
So yeah, lots of weird historical rabbit holes. It's good fun. So yeah, Untitled History pod. It's on all major platforms, as is your own.
Fabulous. Oh, well, that's great. Well, lovely to have more of your lovely voice and brain to be able to enjoy our leisure. Well, thank you very much for that. Now, I think we need to ditch the Maxi and go cycling off now, don't you? I think it's time to enjoy Stevenage in the sun with a corned beef sandwich down a lovely cycleway.
I think that works very well for me. Let's do that.
Excellent. Right. Race you.